Well, everyone, I would like to welcome you to NAAE's monthly webinar series. My name is Judy Browse, and I'm the Executive Director of NAAE, and so thrilled that you could join us. And today we are going to be talking about how you can be a STAR conference presenter and how you can design a session that actually reflects how people learn best. And we couldn't have two better people than John Falk and Judy Koke. So we're really excited to have them, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. But as always, for those of you who have been on our webinars in the past, I wanted to thank our affiliate co-hosts who work with NAAE to sponsor this monthly webinar series. And we really appreciate all the promotion you do and trying to spread the word about these webinars that bring new ideas and thinking to the field. Our affiliate network is one of our greatest strengths at NAAE, and we are so honored and lucky to work with our affiliate network. And I encourage you to check out the affiliates in your state or province to get more involved. So now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our two speakers. And I am really excited to introduce both John and Judy, but I'm going to start with John, who I've had the pleasure of working with for longer than I want to admit. I think, John, since our days at working with the National Wildlife Federation. Right. John is the Executive Director of the Institute for Learning Innovation and Emeritus Sea Grant Professor of Free Choice Learning at the Oregon State University. He is really one of the leading experts on free choice learning and might have even coined the term, which is learning that occurs when people have significant choice and control over the what, the where, and the when of their learning. His current research focuses on understanding the identity and self-related reasons why people use free choice learning settings during their leisure time. He also studies the community impact of parks, museums, libraries, zoos, and aquariums, and helping cultural institutions really rethink their educational positioning in the 21st century. John helped conduct an external review of our conference in Spokane in 2018, and this webinar came out of that evaluation and looking at how can we improve our conference sessions and improve the learning. John has a PhD in biology and education, has published extensively. He serves on a bazillion boards. And if you want to know how many a bazillion is, you can ask him, and he has won many awards. So John, welcome.
Thank you.
And then Judy, I am also very excited to introduce Judy Koke, has a great first name. Like John, she is a respected museum educator and free choice learning expert. She has more than 25 years of experience leading museums to take a more visitor-centered approach to our education work. She has a super strong track record of creating organizational change by integrating research into evidence-based decision-making. And she helps create innovative solutions that can be measured for efficacy and impact. Her career combines audience and learning research with museum leadership, and she has been invited to work with so many museum boards to build understanding of the changing role of museums today. She is currently the Deputy Director of the Institute for Learning Innovation. She's taught in many graduate programs. Her passion for lifelong learning is currently being channeled into researching and developing the next generation of truly effective professional learning opportunities. So let's give John and Judy a warm virtual welcome, and we are going to turn this over to both of them.
John Falk on how to give a better...
So
Whoa.
John and Judy, there you go.
Okay. So Judy is pulling up our slides here, and as soon as she gets that, she's going to take it away. Take it away, Judy.
Great. We're both really happy to be here, and I just want to introduce you to the Institute for Learning Innovation. We're a not-for-profit that's committed to disrupting the narrative around education. And I know I'm, in all likelihood, preaching to the choir here, but we know that 95% of our learning happens outside of a curriculum or a classroom-based setting. But yet, 95% of the research and the funding for research goes back into that classroom. So we're really interested in this opportunity because professional learning, you often have a great deal of choice and control. You're self-motivated, self-directed, and so it is very much free choice learning. John?
Okay, so here we are at this webinar, and what we're going to try and do is give you some insights into how to do better presentations and better posters. Needless to say, every poster, every presentation is unique and specific to the topic, and so our recommendations are going to be somewhat generic, but hopefully they'll be useful to you. So let's start at first principles. Why do you go to a meeting and give a presentation in the first place, or a poster? Well, obviously you have lots of motivations for doing that, and motivations are really important here. Some of these are quite altruistic. I mean, clearly you want to share what you're doing with the field, you want to advance the field, you want to communicate about the good things that you're doing. You want to, potentially get some affirmation for what you're doing and potentially find new collaborators, new colleagues, find out new ideas. And frankly, sometimes a little less altruistically, we also are doing this for our own egos and for our own sense of feeling like we are successful professionals. And obviously, if we want, for all these reasons, for these presentations, these posters, to be well received and be successful. But then a funny thing happens on the way to the conference. Even though I'm willing to bet, and this will be a recurring theme over the next hour, everybody listening in on this webinar is an educator. And you all actually know how people learn, what makes for good learning, how to get people engaged, why people become engaged in learning. And then somehow we think, okay, we have to create this poster, or I'm going to do this presentation. And we forget everything we know, and we fall back on these, frankly, ugly 20th century formal education models of, much like I am at the moment, there's a talking head talking at you, and forget about what it actually means to support learning. So we're going to try and remind you over the next hour on how to do what you actually already know how to do. We're going to help you get back to thinking about why you're bothering to do this at all, and hopefully give you some suggestions that might make it a more effective experience, not only for you, but for all the other people who are participating in that meeting. So to do this, as a kickoff way, Judy and I are going to role play for a moment a poster presentation. And we're going to role play sort of how this sort of works, both from the perspective of the presenter, as well as from the perspective of the person who's walking around looking at posters. So in this particular role play, I'm going to start out as the presenter. Okay, so I'm so excited to share this cool stuff. I got an opportunity to do this poster, and I've been thinking about it for a long time over the past year, how I'm going to put all this information together. It's going to be really great for people. And I'm going to have these really, really great conversations with people as they stop and find out more about what I'm doing and think about all the important stuff that I've done over the past year or two and I'm presenting in this poster. And not only will they get excited, they're going to learn a lot from my poster because, there's a lot of cool stuff in here. And besides, I'm going to get to meet lots of cool people who are interested in the same thing I am. That's in theory how this is supposed to go. But here's what happens in reality. Okay, I've been sitting here for a while. I got this poster up. What a pain in the butt it was to get this poster up. Okay, it's now up. Now I've been standing here, and I've been waiting to talk to somebody, and people just keep walking by. I mean, they won't even make eye contact with me. Come on, I'm not trying to sell you salami here. What's wrong with you people? Why won't you stop? Come on, look. This is a really cool graph. Do you realize how long it took me to make this graph? And I paid $100 to get this damn thing printed. What's wrong with you people? No one's even looking at it. God, I don't even know why anyone won't just stop and talk to me.
So meanwhile, the audience, as an audience member of a poster session, you're thinking, well, I'm going to walk through this poster session. I'm going to get to see all the cool stuff people are working on. And I know I'm going to find some great ideas to support my work. But in reality, everyone looks so desperate, audience and presenters both. And I feel like if I start talking with someone, I'll never get away. And I don't really have a clue whose work relates to my work, because what does that title on that poster even mean? So many details. I just want to know what you're thinking about and whether I'm interested or not.
So here's some background information. I'm going to tell you 5 things, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that research tells us about learning. And as I said a few minutes ago, the good news is you actually know all this stuff, but I'm going to reinforce it for you. Okay, so 1. The first thing we know is that it's really important to start where the learner is at. It's not about what you want to tell them, it's about what they want to know. And the game is about making the connection between what they want to know and what you have to say. Because learning is always constructed. We make meaning based on what we know from our own past knowledge and experience. In fact, literally, if at the end of this hour, I asked everybody to write down, and we may just do this, the 2 things that you took away from this, lo and behold, there will be dozens, if not hundreds, of different versions of what people decide was the most important takeaway message. That's because we all come into this with our own unique motivations, our own goals, and our own unique ideas of what's important and how to make sense of that. So the key is, and this is always challenging, how do you try and make sense of who do you think your audience is? Well, one way, if it's a small enough audience, you can actually ask them. But at any rate, the challenge is trying to start where people are at and appreciating that even though you may be thinking about something in this very abstract and generalized way, most people have to begin that process starting at a very concrete, situation-specific place. So, 2. That's your cue, Judy. 2.
I know. I'm working on it. Sorry, I'm just not getting any cooperation. There we go.
2. Okay. We all need support in order to learn. There's this thing called advanced organizers, which is basically saying, what I'm going to do is tell you about the 5 things that I think are fundamental to what people know. That's an advanced organizer. You know that I'm now going to talk about 5 things. And I'm also going to give you the advanced organizer that these are not strange and novel things. They're things that you probably already know. That's a support. That's going to help you make sense of this. It's a way to scaffold these ideas. But in fact, given that people are coming from multiple different perspectives, some of you are researchers, some of you are practitioners, some of you may be administrators, I'm going to have to scaffold this in terms of presentation in a way that people can approach this from different perspectives and make sense of it. And then the other thing that's really important to appreciate is repetition is not a bad word. These presentations are really short. And if you have something important you want to say, you might want to say it more than once. 3, we all get bored just listening to people talk at us all the time. So use different modalities. Use images on the screen. Use emotions. We don't learn just because, rationally. The only way we ever learn is through emotions. And they can be good emotions like happiness and surprise and laughter. They can even be somewhat negative emotions like surprise or startle people with information, something unexpected. But those kinds of experiences will help make learning more memorable. And of course, variability is an asset. So let's mix up our presentations and our posters with different kinds of elements. 4, guess what? We're all social creatures and learning is social. So to the extent that you can involve people in this experience or help people be more conversational, thinking about what they're doing, and we all know the value of hands-on, but it's also minds-on and conversation-on too. So get people talking and engage people in your presentation or ask questions that get them to start thinking as you're talking. And finally, 5, learning is never instantaneous. Learning is cumulative, continuous, and situational. So to the extent that we can create experiences that live on beyond the moment, because not only if I ask you to write down what you think is important from this talk, immediately at the end of this talk, will there be lots of differences. But if I contacted you again in a month from now and asked you what was important about this talk, if you remembered it, you would likely write down something different than what you wrote down immediately following the talk, because things have happened, you've begun to process it, and you've begun to realize, hopefully, what was important. And if I created the tools to allow you to be thinking about it over that time, even more likely that you'd be able to make sense of this conversation, this talk, this poster over time, which at the end of the day is what's really important, right? It doesn't matter whether you had a great experience in this 1 hour or 20 minutes or 5 minutes when you're standing in front of the poster. What's important is what happens over the long term. And so we should always be striving to create experiences that have longevity and continuing impact over time, not just in the moment. Okay.
So thinking about not just poster sessions, conferences are combinations of poster sessions and presentation, thinking about the presenter. The presenter goes into planning the presentation thinking, okay, I have 20 minutes to tell this story that unfolded over the past 3 years. And stories always start at the beginning, so I better start with a lot of background information, and then I have to add the details of my methodology or no one's going to believe my findings. And when they do hear the punchline, though, they're going to be amazed. I'm sure it'll make them consider their work in new ways. But in reality, you stand at a podium looking at people who are starting to look a bit bored, and sometimes even people start walking out. Come on, guys, this is really interesting. Just wait till you hear our findings. Are they even thinking out there? I thought this was the best time slot.
And of course, if you're the audience, the good news is, I've been looking through this whole program and I've been marking it off. I've been trying to figure out which is the best way to spend my time. And so, I'm really excited to hear this talk. In fact, I've actually heard about or read about this person's work, and I can't wait to really hear what they're going to say. It's going to be so interesting. I'm really jacked. I'm going to learn so much that's going to be useful to my new project. And I'll even get a chance to meet other people who share my interests and my concerns. And again, this whole thing's going to be so cool. And then often the reality is, oh my God, wait, don't advance the slide yet. No, not yet. I haven't even copied it all down. How do I know what's the most important bits? Or, oh my God, the PowerPoint. Oh my God, death by PowerPoint. Well, wait a second. At least maybe they'll make the PowerPoint available afterwards. Will they make the PowerPoint available afterwards? I don't know. I better take more notes just in case they don't. Wait a second. What was that bit again? That sounded important. Oh, is this really going to seem useful? I don't know. It feels a little bit like show and tell to me. Maybe I should have gone to another session. I wonder if there's still time. Maybe I should have even skipped this session. I know it would have, I probably would have had a more productive time standing out in the hallway and catching up with my colleagues. I mean, when is this sucker ever going to be over?
So now we want to involve our audience. So we're doing it for two reasons. If we're having the meta conversation, one is for variability, and one is to encourage you to make personal connections to some of the conversation and the ideas that we've presented. So into the chat box, I'd like you to respond to the following questions. If you consider something that you learned recently that really changes how you move through life, whether it was for work or for, a passion project that you have or for parenting, what were the elements of that learning? You don't have to tell us what you learned, but think about what were the elements of that learning experience. You can type it into the chat box so that we can all see it and think about it. This would be a great thing if we were live to do in a large group, sharing in in conversation. I'd like to know, from whom did you learn this interesting thing? And how soon after you learned it did you actually put it into practice? So if you could consider the last time you learned something really quite transformative for you, we'd love to know your answers to those questions.
Judy, could you give an example of what you mean by element?
Certainly. What I mean about element. So John talked about learning being social. He talked about it being in context. He talked about it being supported somehow. He talked about multiple approaches to the idea. And Elizabeth has talked about here that there was a chance to work with people she really respected and that they found things out together. Nina is saying that she had a sense of trust with the presenter, that there was a lot of respect and connection with the presenter.
Right. And who's this? This is Christina is talking about real stories, lived experience from people. So again, if that's really important to be able to ground this in reality and talk about real people doing real things.
And I like too that Alexa has talked about it being really hands-on, that she learned by doing, by being supported through the process by someone who shared her practice. Joanna's talking about close-up photos of dragonflies. So really seeing something on an unusual scale, which is that variability piece, that change of perspective that allows you to actually see things differently.
And humor. Humor is always good, Franny says. Yep.
I like Anna's talking about in response to the question, how did you make it yours? She said that after the learning experience, whatever that was, she created a concept map that really organized the key points for her in her mind.
And Carly is saying, and we're going to circle back to this, it was immediately applicable to my daily life. That's a really critical thing. And obviously trying to figure out how to make what you say applicable to everybody's life is going to be challenging, but to the extent that you can make things applicable to people's lives and their work is obviously critical.
Yeah, and Bonnie points to that as well when she said she tried to implement the learning immediately to keep the momentum going. And I think that's so true. I think we've all been in the situation where we learn something fabulous and then 3 weeks later, we come into a context or situation where it's really strongly applicable and we can't quite wrap ourselves around the idea to implement it. So being able to teach in context, on demand sort of teaching is really helpful in trying to change work practice.
And Colleen said, someone I respected demonstrated a new way of teaching something, and I started using it the next time I was presenting in a class, and it became quote unquote mine as soon as I did it the first time. And again, to the extent that we can model the kinds of things we're talking about, this particular webinar structure is a challenging one since it's hard to be interactive, but Judy and I have worked really hard to try and model for you the kinds of things we're talking about, this notion of getting interactions from people, getting people engaged, as well as different modalities, changing up the presentation modality, having images. So that's all way cool.
And just finally, Jennifer's mentioned, that it was cumulative, but what really sort of kicked it over the edge for her was that she realized she was part of a community of people who cared about the same thing. And that just really underscores that personal connection and that social basis of learning. So I think you can see that you have yourselves generated that multiple approach that John was talking about, the multiple modalities, how active learning is, that it does take time. It sort of gets embedded over time as you process it. There is an interesting comment about going home and turning it into a visual representation, because some people obviously learn differently than the presenters who present, and then the infrastructure to learn and to be organized to take new information and connect it to something you already know. Great, that was really useful. Sorry, I'm just trying to, there we go. So thinking about what John said, about what research tells us about how people learn, I'd like to talk for a little bit now about how that translates into creating a presentation or a poster session, really, either. So John talked about always starting where the learner is. And you actually have about 60 seconds to hook somebody. So we all know from watching TED Talks that people tell really stimulating stories that kind of grab you at the beginning. I'm not a TED Talk level speaker, but what I try to do is always start with a personal connection. So I try to think of an example of when somebody was in a situation similar to mine, and I'm sure you've been in a situation where you wanted to know this about your learners, or when you wanted to know whether to choose A or B. So making the hook for your audience, because you have a shared passion around environmental education, is about presenting the key point of your talk as part of the answer to a problem that your group is facing. So finding that context, finding examples. John talked a lot about learners needing support. So having really clear goals, especially in your own mind. So just like, writing a paper or creating an exhibition, you should have one strong key point that if somebody learns only one main idea, they learn that idea. And again, repeating it so people are clear on what that idea is. I also strongly recommend that you keep a closing statement in your back pocket, because very often the question and answer period will take your talk off in some new direction. So being able to bring it back to your key point and close it with that message. Again, using multiple learning approaches. Don't put a whole lot of words on the screen when you're talking. Two sets of language aren't helpful. They compete with each other. So really finding images that express what you're trying to express without text is really helpful. Using emotion's a key part of learning, to stimulate those neural pathways, and then bringing in multiple voices and role playing or video clips of other people speaking what you would like people to understand. John talked about learning being social. One of the questions that we got in advance was, how do we create social learning opportunities in a short presentation? I'm a huge fan of small group work, of putting a couple ideas forward and having a large group split into smaller groups and then report back to the larger audience. But that is not always possible if you only have 20 minutes. So there are a couple of recommendations for that. Taking some time just to share with your neighbor, the ye old standard pair and share is a really effective tool. Or asking your audience to take a moment and write something down. Then they are more inclined to hold on to that idea and share it with someone else after the participation, after the session. And wherever possible, creating opportunities for really focused audience participation reinforces that social piece that came up in a lot of your conversations about your strong learning experiences. And then we talked a lot about learning taking time. It's a process. We connect learning to things we already know and then test it against the world. So giving people a tangible thing to do or think about at work, having them make a commitment, and even circling back to a partner that they're sitting with, a friend, a coworker that they're in the session with, can really reinforce those key ideas that you're trying to get across as part of your conference session. We wanted to share this this model of a poster that we found. This is from Mike Morrison, and there's a great paper that's, we have the URL at the end of our presentation, but he did a lot of research into poster sessions and how to communicate effectively. And you can see his suggestion is a whole lot of blank space with tight, small sections of deeper, detailed text on the sides, so that your main finding in very plain English calls people to you and allows people to understand what your key or your big idea is, and then they can approach you to find out the details or to read the details. He also recommends some sort of URL or barcode so that people can very quickly access your information to use at home again when they're at your desk. So we'd like to hear what your questions are given these ideas. And please type your questions into the chat box, not the question and answer box.
Yeah, and Judy and John, we already have a few questions, so I'm going to feed you a few right now as people are typing in more, if that's okay.
Sure.
Jennifer asked about, is there a sweet spot in terms of how much info to pack in? And you just talked about that with the poster, but Cindy also had something on, as people are walking by, how aggressive should you be in engaging people to talk to them? What do you think the best protocol etiquette is as you're in a poster session to try and get people's attention?
And I'm happy to jump in here. I think if you have this really big, clear sentence, you're going to find a whole lot more people coming to you and engaging you in conversation. So this, this is particularly the introvert's dream, that it gives you a tag or a platform on which to initiate a conversation. John, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. And I mean, this is one of those times where, and I'll share an anecdote here. So as Judy Browse mentioned, that one of the things that I've been doing for a long, long time is helping organizations, institutions try and make sense of what impact they have. And historically, much of that research was done with places like museums. And the question that I constantly would be asking museum people, so they want to know what the impact of an exhibit is. And so I'm saying, okay, well, here's the good news. Visitors may spend 15 or 20 minutes in this exhibit. Now that's 15 or 20 minutes in a day, 15 or 20 minutes in a week, 15 or 20 minutes in a year, 15 to 20 minutes perhaps in a lifetime. So what would be your goal for someone to learn if you had 15 or 20 minutes of their time? And you can apply that same logic to a poster session or presentation. You have people for a very brief period of time. The goal should be a layered goal. At a minimum, you'd want everybody who walks by your poster to understand what was important here. One big idea, simply put. You'd want in your presentation everybody to come away with one big idea about what's important here. Because the details, if they're really interested, they'll come and talk to you for more. They'll read your paper. They'll contact you and engage you in further conversation. But it is unreasonable to assume that you're going to communicate your lifetime's worth of work and interest and ideas in this very brief period of time. That's just totally not only unrealistic, it's counterproductive. So if you remember the big idea that I was trying to communicate about this webinar is to remember what we already know. Each and every one of us already know and understands about how we learn and what is salient about learning for us, and to apply that understanding to these contexts, just as you would to your everyday practice. And the details will follow. So the sweet spot is try and figure out what that big key message is and make sure it's clear. And if you have an opportunity, like in a presentation, say that big idea several times so that you increase the probability that people will hear it.
Okay.
Judy, can I jump in and add a couple of, there's a question about readability and engagement. How do you balance readability and engagement with the credibility of the science? And if you give people the URL, all the details of the methodology are going to be in that. But you want to find out who are other people thinking about what you're thinking about, and how do you connect with them? If they are interested in your paper, then they can find out about the methodology, not the other way around. So I think that's something that when I do that, it's usually out of a bit of insecurity. I want people to know I did it well and I took a lot of time and was really thoughtful. Dual coding means multiple media. So words versus pictures versus music versus movement. So using your hands properly when you're teaching, and so that it really positively reinforces what you're talking about, using those photographs that speak without words. And then someone else mentioned the reflective journaling, and I just really want to underscore that that's related to the learning takes time. So being able to hear something, think about it, journal about it, read it again, all of that supports the time that learning takes.
And the question about, how aggressively should you be trying to grab people in a poster session? If you write that central idea, in fact, Judy, if you can go back to that picture again, the previous slide.
I will try.
So if you can make that main idea, people will come to you and want to know more. In general, this is more about thinking of yourself as a orb spider rather than a wolf spider. This isn't about going out and grabbing people by the ankles and dragging them back to your poster so that you can suck their blood dry. If you've created a beautiful web in the right spot, if you've created a compelling message, people will get sucked into that message. And then you can have a good conversation and find out what it was. And in fact, the first thing you would say to them is, thank you for stopping. Let me tell you all about this study. The first question you'd ask is, I'm thrilled that you came over here. What was it that attracted your attention? Why were you interested in this? And then I can help you understand and explain to you and help you answer your questions. Remember, people, as much as you'd like to think that you're in control, actually the audience is in control. It's their learning that's going on here. You're trying to help them, not them trying to help you. And so that's useful to remember.
And I think, too, there's an added complication sometimes at your particular conference, because you often have an audience that is mixed with researchers and practitioners, and the researchers might actually be more interested in your methodology than in your findings, whereas the practitioners are more interested in your actual findings and how to apply them. So maybe there are, in that case, two clear single key messages. So our methodology, was qualitative for this reason. And then again, if people want to find out more, they can reach out to you, especially if you provide them with URLs or the complete study at the end. There's also a question here about, if you really make it this simple, do you come across as dumbing something down? And that's a a conversation I've had for years and years in museum settings. And my position is that it's actually much more difficult to explain a concept like gravity to seventh graders than it is to first-year university students. Really making complex ideas communicate clearly at an accessible level. If you remember, when we changed domains at the 8th grade level. So talking at the 13th grade level isn't always helpful for people, novices and people new to your particular field. So don't think about it as dumbing down. Think about it as the hook that then you can build on once you know who your audience is.
Okay. So I'm a little confused here. Diana was talking about using flipboards where I can create a magazine of links, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. And then Sue is saying, I second Diana's question, but I don't know what are the group's thoughts on providing some sort of graphic organizer? Again, I think it's never an either or, it's always a both and. To the extent that you can help people make sense of what you're talking about with an image. The image on the screen is a great example of where I could try and spend a half an hour verbally trying to explain what this poster might look like, whereas the image up on the screen makes it pretty clear what it is we're talking about, and then I can embellish that. So again, you want to use the modality that makes most sense for the information you're trying to convey, and then embellish around that, as opposed to gratuitously wanting to include pictures or gratuitously wanting to include graphs because you should have graphs, or you should have tables, so we'll include a table. Don't include anything that isn't necessary, that isn't the primary driver of the information, or doesn't equally support the information that you're trying to provide. And the rule of thumb is to keep remembering, this is a very brief encounter, whether it's a brief encounter of 15, 20 minutes of a session, or a brief encounter it could be as fleeting as somebody walking by a poster. You want to make sure that you maximize the most important information.
Yeah.
And help people get. I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt, John and Judy. Just a couple of questions from way back. Can you say more about where people can find more information about how to conduct role plays And any best practices for serving on a panel? That's from Emily, in an engaging way. Those two questions.
Yeah, and the panel presentation is a lot like, how do you organize all this with a co-presenter? It's just more than one person. And I think it's really important to apply principles we've been talking about for a single presenter to what's the key message that the panel wants to get across, and how do the three perhaps presenters, what's their key message that then supports the top line message of the panel, which might be, I don't know, engaging underrepresented youth, say. Then there are three presenters talking about their different programs. Their key message should strongly connect to the message of the panel and circle back to that at the beginning and the end to loop back. So John and I, had an idea about how to do this together. We sketched it out, we practiced it, didn't quite work the way we wanted to. We made some changes. We would do it differently again if we were to do it again. So I think that practice and that planning, keeping those elements of learning in mind, are really important. Yes. I don't know of resources for role playing, but I can look and add them in the comments once this is posted in the archives, if that would be helpful.
But I would also just remind people that just because you have a panel isn't an excuse to fall back on these old tried and untrue methods of just having people talking forever. So even though you have a panel, I continuously organize panel sessions, and I tell the panelists, okay, we've got an hour session. You've got 3 minutes to communicate the big idea. And if you can't communicate the big idea of your study in 3 minutes, then what are we doing here? And by all means, create a paper. These are academic presentations. So I'm telling academics, okay, you have 3 minutes, 2 slides, give us your big idea, bring a paper if anybody wants to really read the methods, and let's devote the majority of the session to having a conversation with the audience about the ideas that we've talked about. We're all grown-ups. If you want to read the methods and in detail, see exactly what statistics were used, you can read the paper. We don't need to hear that. We've come to hear the big ideas. We've come to share and try and understand something about what you did so that I can learn about what I could do in the future. So if that's the goal of the session, let's make that the goal of the session. Other questions?
Right. Another question that came in was sometimes saying the goals of a talk at the beginning and then again at the end sounds like really manufactured or redundant, that here's what I'm going to talk about. And a lot of people say you should do this. And then at the end, here's what I talked about. I think you said that was good. And you also said one goal, but somebody else said, what if you have 3 major points?
Okay, have 3 major points. And nobody suggests that you even have to use the exact same words. So restate it a different way if you're concerned about it sounding repetitious. But if you're committed to having somebody come away with the idea, then you need to work at making sure they come away with the idea. If you want people to come away with the big idea that, damn, there was a lot of information in there, but I'd be hard-pressed to recall what it was, then, go for it. That could be the goal of the session, which is what happens in most sessions. There's so much information, and it's so hard to decipher what is critical here that you come away with an inability to actually even know what is important.
And I want to differentiate between the advanced organizer and the big idea. So starting your session by saying the purpose of the meeting, or what I'm going to talk to you about is the program we did for our youth at our center and how it changed our understanding of what engages youth. That's your advanced organizer. Or it might be, we're going to talk about the 5 steps of learning and then talk about the 5 steps of learning. But your key idea might be, we weren't effective working with these youth until we really learned to listen to them and develop systems for listening to youth. And so that's the key idea that you would get to early on in your presentation. Support that story with the how you listen to youth and what the difference it is it made, and then finally wrap up by saying the same thing. So the advanced organizer and the key idea are 2 separate things.
Perfect. I'm just looking to see if there was anything else on that.
Well, otherwise we could move, Judy, to our next, unless you have a pressing question. We had one last closing activity.
Okay, perfect.
So given that we're in this virtual setting, we'd like each of you, wherever you are, and some of you might be watching with someone else, so you could have a conversation, but of the things we've mentioned, what are the most easily consumable for you? What are 2 things that you feel like you could incorporate into your presentation style that you commit to wanting to do the next time you do a presentation? And we'd like you to write them down. You can do it in the chat box. But you could also do it on a piece of paper and tape it up in front of your desk where you sit and then prepare your presentations when you get ready to do
Write it down and fold it up and put it in your pocket and sit on it.
If we were at a real live conference, I would do this pair and share. To really get some conversation going and maybe even some support from each other. Yeah, you could do that. That'd be easy. You could do it this way. But since a lot of us are sitting alone with our computers, the next alternative is to try and write them down. And I'm going to open up chat again and see what comes in there.
Yeah, they're coming fast and furious. It's hard to keep up. Thank you, everybody, for writing all these down. Lots of social stuff. That's good. Don't fall back on bad practices. Cool.
It'll be interesting to see how we all have evolved new techniques too for this kind of presentation, and how technology will support us in reaching people and in interaction in the virtual world.
Right. And by the way, this is confirming of my earlier prediction that, of course, there are overlaps in these ideas, but there aren't identical ones, and we've got as many different takeaway messages, what's really important to people, at least, and even expressed, as are people who are participating. That's because, again, we're all constructing our meaning in our own unique ways. And so, again, what you have to make sure is that you create enough richness in what you're presenting so that different people can find something that's meaningful to them and take that away. So again, it's not that we're trying to suggest that you just have one sentence and you repeat that same sentence 150 times for 20 minutes. It all should be a whole, but it is this constructed whole that we're trying to create.
And the 2 references that we wanted to direct you to, and again, I've made a note to look for role-playing references, but the Mike Morrison article about poster sessions, is in the Inside Higher Ed. And then there's a pretty strong TEDx presentation on how to avoid death by PowerPoint. So I have put that at the end here for you as well. And we just wanted to let you know that we're always interested in hearing from you. So if you want to connect after the presentation through LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, you can find the Institute for Learning and Innovation there, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, John and Judy. We really appreciate all these wonderful tips, and thanks to everyone for so many amazing ideas. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Anne, but just thank you again for all those ideas, and we will share all of this. And Anne, if you want to take it away, that would be great.
Thank you, everybody. And since we did just learn that repetition is not a bad word, we will be sharing the recording with all of you. If you registered for it, you'll be getting it in an email by early next week. Watch it with a friend, watch it with a colleague, and share it with a colleague. And we'll also be sharing all of the great chat and the discussion that we shared today. You'll get a copy of that so you can capture that as well. In addition, we wanted to share with you another wonderful hands-on and minds-on opportunity we have coming up. I love that phrase, John, when you said that, hands-on and minds-on. We'll be having our 48th annual conference in Lexington, Kentucky this October. And it is an amazing opportunity for some incredible social learning and lots of great speakers and talks lined up. We're going to be together there in conference. Before the conference starts, we'll also be doing the research symposium. We'll be answering really key research questions. Some great keynotes also lined up for that research symposium. We'll be opening the conference with a great keynote from John Flicker, who's the president of Prescott College. He was also at Audubon for 15 years. On Wednesday, a keynote from Mona Chalabi, who is the data editor at The Guardian, who's going to be talking about data literacy and data journalism, a really great speaker. On Friday, we have this amazing flash panel set up where all these speakers will be speaking to our conference theme for educating for a more just and sustainable future. And then to close out our week together, we are bringing back our very popular 30 under 30 young leaders making a difference. This amazing panel is going to be speaking with us during our closing ceremony and our awards ceremony. So we've got just an incredible week prepared. In addition, just related to the 30 under 30, we do have a whole slew of sessions dedicated for young professionals. So we really want to think about how we can help our young professionals in this field. Lots of great talks on resume writing, networking, and also new this year, when you register, you can sign up to be a conference buddy with someone else. So if you're brand new to our conference, or if you're a veteran at our conference and you want to help someone new, you can sign up to be a conference buddy. And I think that is it. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you again, Judy and John, and see you all next time. Take care, everybody.